When did being a good parent mean breaking the law? The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday in March. My phone lit up the dark bedroom with Ethan's name flashing across the screen, which made no sense because Ethan was supposed to be asleep in his dorm room at Riverside Academy 3 hours north. I answered before the second ring, my heart already hammering. "Dad?" His voice was wrong, shaking, terrified. "Dad, I need you to come get me. Right now. Please don't ask questions, just come." In the background I heard shouting, then what sounded like breaking glass. "Ethan, what's happening? Are you hurt?" I can't explain on the phone. "Dad, please. I'm at the old warehouse on Polk Street, the red brick one. Please hurry." He hung up. I was out of bed before my wife Julia could ask what was wrong. Threw on jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed my keys. She followed me downstairs demanding answers I didn't have. Our 15-year-old son was supposed to be safe at his elite boarding school, not calling from some warehouse in the middle of the night sounding like death itself was chasing him. I told her to call the school, find out what the hell was going on. Then I was in my truck driving north on empty highways, doing 90 where the speed limit was 65, my mind racing faster than my wheels. Polk Street was in the industrial district on the south side of Riverside, the kind of area where nothing good happens after dark. I found the warehouse at 4:18 a.m., its red brick walls illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. Ethan was huddled against the loading dock, knees pulled to his chest, still wearing his school uniform, but the shirt was torn and there was blood on his face. I was out of the truck before it fully stopped, running to him. He looked up, and I saw terror in his eyes that no 16-year-old should ever experience. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He was crying, whole body shaking. I pulled him into my arms and he clung to me like he was 5 years old again. "Tell me what happened." "I can't. They'll kill me if I tell. They said they'd kill my whole family." The words came out in gasps between sobs. I held him tighter, scanning the area for threats, seeing nothing but shadows and empty streets. "Who said that?" "Ethan. Who threatened you?" He shook his head violently. "We have to go. We have to leave right now. They might come back." I got him into the truck and started driving, heading back toward home on autopilot while trying to get answers. But Ethan just stared out the window, shaking, refusing to speak. I called Julia. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with panic. "The school says Ethan checked out yesterday afternoon with a signed permission slip from you for a family emergency. They have your signature on file." "I never signed anything. I didn't even know he was gone." Julia's voice cracked. "Thomas, what is happening?" I looked at Ethan, who had his face pressed against the window. "I don't know yet, but something's very wrong." We got home at dawn. Julia met us at the door and immediately tried to pull Ethan into a hug, but he flinched away from her touch. That's when I saw the bruises on his wrists, dark purple marks that looked like someone had gripped him hard enough to leave permanent impressions. Julia saw them too, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Ethan, baby. Who hurt you?" He walked past her without answering, heading straight upstairs to his room. We heard the door lock. I called the school back, demanding to speak to the headmaster. Dr. Raymond Ashford came on the line, sounding annoyed at being woken before 6 a.m. I explained that my son was home, that I never authorized him to leave campus, that someone had forged my signature. There was a long pause. "Mr. Brenner, I'm looking at the permission slip now. That's definitely your signature. I've seen it on dozens of documents. I'm telling you I didn't sign it. My son is terrified. He has bruises. Something happened to him and I need to know what." Another pause. "I'll review our security footage and get back to you." He hung up. I spent the next hour trying to get Ethan to talk. Sat outside his locked bedroom door, begging him to let me help. He wouldn't open the door, wouldn't explain, just kept saying over and over that they'd kill us if he talked. Julia called the police. 2 officers arrived at 8 a.m., both looking skeptical from the moment they walked in. Officer Davis, older with gray at his temples, took notes while his partner, a younger woman named Officer Kim, asked Ethan questions through his bedroom door. "Son, we can't help you if you don't tell us what happened." Silence. "Did someone hurt you? We can protect you." More silence. Officer Davis turned to me. "Has your son been having any behavioral issues? Drug use? Mental health problems?" The implication was clear. They thought this was teenage drama, maybe a drug deal gone wrong. "My son is a straight-A student at one of the best schools in the state. He's never been in trouble. He's terrified of something, and I need you to take this seriously." Officer Kim tried again with Ethan. "Were you involved in something illegal? If you tell us now, we can work with you." The door finally opened. Ethan stood there, eyes red and swollen. "I want them to leave. Dad, make them leave." The officers exchanged looks. Davis handed me his card. "Call if your son decides he wants to talk, or if you need help dealing with whatever this is." They left. I could see the judgment in their eyes. Dr. Ashford called back at noon. His tone was different now, carefully neutral. "Mr. Brenner, I've reviewed our footage from yesterday. Ethan left campus at 1:30 p.m. with 3 other students. They got into a black SUV. The vehicle registration is blocked, which is unusual. Ethan returned to campus at 11:45 p.m. alone, retrieved some items from his dorm, and left again at midnight. Who were the other students? I'm not at liberty to discuss. That without parental consent. One of them forged my signature. One of them is involved in whatever happened to my son. Tell me their names." Dr. Ashford's voice hardened. I've called an emergency meeting of our board for tomorrow morning. Until then, I recommend you keep Ethan home and consider getting him professional help. This kind of behavior is grounds for expulsion. Behavior? My son is the victim here. That remains to be seen. He hung up. I stared at my phone, rage building in my chest. They were already trying to blame Ethan, already positioning him as the problem instead of investigating what happened to him. Julia had been researching Riverside Academy's policies. Thomas, look at this. The school has a clause about maintaining institutional reputation. They can expel students for bringing negative attention to the school, even if they're victims of a crime. That's insane. It's legal. It's in the contract we signed. That afternoon, Ethan finally came downstairs. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Julia made him soup that he didn't touch. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, trying to keep my voice calm. Son, I know you're scared, but I can't protect you if I don't know what happened. He stared at his hands, at those awful bruises. They'll hurt you and Mom. They said they know where we live. They showed me pictures of our house, of Julia gardening in the backyard. They know everything. My blood ran cold. Who are they? I can't. His voice broke. Dad, please don't make me tell you. Just let it go. Let it go? Look at yourself. Look at what they did to you. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You don't understand. These people, they're not like anyone you've ever dealt with. They're powerful. They're connected. If I talk, they'll destroy all of us. Ethan, I'm going back to my room. Please stop asking. He left. Julia and I sat in the kitchen, helpless. That evening, a package arrived. No return address, just our names written in block letters. Inside was a USB drive and a note. Drop this. The boy knows what's good for him. I plugged the drive into my laptop and wished immediately that I hadn't. The video was time-stamped from the previous night. It showed Ethan in what looked like a basement, tied to a chair. 3 other teenagers stood around him, faces obscured by ski masks. But I could see their Riverside Academy uniforms, see the school crest on their jackets. They were taking turns hitting him, asking him questions I couldn't make out on the audio. Ethan was crying, begging. Then one of them pulled off their mask and I saw blonde hair, a cruel smile. A girl, maybe 17. She leaned close to Ethan's face. Your dad's a lawyer, right? Works for that corporate firm downtown? Guess who owns that firm? I couldn't hear Ethan's response. That's right. My father owns it. Your dad works for my dad. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget everything you saw. Tonight, you're going to go back to school and keep your mouth shut. Because if you don't, my father will make sure your dad loses his job. Then he'll make sure your family loses everything else. Your house, your cars, your reputation. We can do that. We've done it before. She put the mask back on. The video ended. I sat staring at the blank screen, my hands shaking. Julia had watched over my shoulder, her face pale. Thomas? Who is that girl? I had a terrible suspicion. Opened my work laptop and pulled up our client files. Ashford Industries, our biggest client. I clicked through to the executive team photos. There she was, Victoria Ashford, age 17, daughter of CEO Richard Ashford, the same man whose brother was headmaster at Riverside Academy, the same family that basically owned half the city. We're calling the police, Julia said. We're showing them this video. And telling them what? That the daughter of my boss is on that video? The police work for the city. The Ashford family funds half the city budget. You saw how those officers looked at us this morning. So we're supposed to do nothing? I thought about Ethan upstairs, about those bruises, about the terror in his voice. Thought about my job, our mortgage, Julia's medical bills from last year's cancer treatment. Thought about how easily the Ashfords could destroy us financially. We need to be smart about this. Smart? Our son was tortured. I know. My voice came out too loud. I lowered it. I know. But if we go to the police with this, the Ashfords will claim it's fake. They'll have expensive lawyers. They'll drag Ethan's name through the mud, and I'll lose my job. How do we fight them without money? Julia's eyes filled with tears. So we let them win? We let them terrorize our son and do nothing? I didn't have an answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that video, about Victoria's cold smile, about Ethan's pleas for mercy. Around 2 a.m., I went to his room. The door was still locked, but I could hear him crying on the other side. Ethan, let me in. Silence. Please, son. I saw the video. The lock clicked. Ethan opened the door, his face a mask of horror. They sent it to you? Oh, God. Oh, God. They said they wouldn't. Tell me what happened. All of it. He sat on his bed, hands clasped between his knees. There's this group at school, the Legacy Club. It's supposed to be about leadership and community service, but it's really about connections. Rich kids whose parents run everything. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but last month I saw them meeting in the library basement after hours. They were doing something with fake IDs, making them for other students. Professional quality. You should have told someone. I know. I should have. But I thought it was just kids being stupid. Then yesterday, Victoria and 2 others grabbed me after class. Said they knew I'd seen them. Said I needed to come with them to prove I wouldn't talk. He started, crying again. They drove me to this house outside town. Made me watch while they tested the fake IDs at a liquor store. The clerk didn't even check them closely. Then they took me to some warehouse. Said they needed to make sure I understood what would happen if I told anyone. And they beat you. They called it an initiation. Said if I wanted to stay at Riverside, I had to prove I was loyal. They hit me until I said I'd never tell. Then Victoria showed me photos of you and Mom. Showed me documents about Dad's job. Told me exactly how they'd destroy our family. His hands were shaking. They made me sign something. A confession saying I'd stolen school property. Predated it to last semester. Said if I ever talked, they'd turn it in, and I'd be expelled and arrested. I felt rage building in my chest, so intense I thought I might pass out. Where's this confession? They kept it. Locked in Victoria's personal safe in her dorm room. She showed it to me, laughed about it. I pulled out my phone, opened the video file. Do you know who the other two students are? The ones with masks? Carson Whitfield and Nathan Lancaster. Their families own the construction company and the hospital system. The three of them basically run the school. Of course they did. Three of the wealthiest families in the state, their children torturing mine with complete impunity because they knew they were untouchable. I stood up. Get some sleep. We're going to fix this. Dad, you can't. You don't understand what they're capable of. I understand perfectly. That's why we're not going through official channels. His eyes widened. What are you going to do? Whatever I have to. I left before he could ask more questions. Julia was waiting in our bedroom. I heard everything. Thomas, we can't take on these families. They'll destroy us. They've already destroyed us. They terrorized our son, made him afraid to come home. I won't let them get away with it. So what's your plan? Storm into their houses demanding justice? They own the police, the courts, probably half the judges in this county. She was right. Going through official channels would fail. The Ashfords would use their influence to bury everything, and we'd lose what little we had, which meant I needed to think like they did. Find leverage. Fight dirty. The next morning I called in sick to work. Spent 3 hours researching the Legacy Club, the Ashford family, anything I could find about Victoria and her friends. Found plenty. Victoria had a sealed juvenile record that I couldn't access, but there were whispers online. A girl at her old school had accused her of assault, then suddenly transferred. No charges filed. Carson Whitfield had been involved in a car accident last year that left another student injured. His family's lawyers made it disappear. Nathan Lancaster's father was under investigation for Medicare fraud, but the case kept getting delayed. These kids had been protected their whole lives, taught that consequences were for other people. At noon, Ethan came downstairs looking like he hadn't slept. Dad, the school called. They want me to come in for a meeting tomorrow about my unauthorized absence. They said if I don't show, they'll report me as truant. You're not going back there. I have to. If I don't, they'll expel me. And then everything I've worked for is gone. My transcript, my college applications, everything. Julia put her hand on his shoulder. We'll find another school. In the middle of junior year, every school will ask why I left Riverside. The Ashfords will make sure I never get accepted anywhere. He was right. They'd poison his future out of spite. I made a decision. You're going to that meeting, but I'm going with you, and I'm recording everything. If they try to threaten you again, I want evidence. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next morning. Dr. Ashford's office was wood-paneled and expensive, full of plaques and photos showing him with various politicians and celebrities. He sat behind his massive desk, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Victoria was there too, sitting in a leather chair looking innocent and concerned. I wanted to put my fist through her face. Mr. Brenner, Ethan, thank you for coming. Dr. Ashford gestured to chairs across from his desk. I wanted to discuss Ethan's recent behavior and how we can move forward productively. My son's behavior? I kept my voice level. He was assaulted, threatened, tortured by students at your school. Victoria's eyes widened in perfectly practiced shock. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Brenner. Do you have any evidence? I have a video. A video that could be anything. Staged, manipulated. You'd be amazed what kids can do with editing software these days. She looked at Dr. Ashford. Uncle Raymond, I'm concerned about Ethan. He's been acting strange lately. Paranoid. Last week he accused me of following him. I think he might need psychiatric evaluation. My hands clenched into fists. Dr. Ashford nodded sympathetically. Victoria mentioned these concerns to me before this incident. I was planning to recommend counseling. This is unbelievable. You're sitting here gaslighting my son while his attacker plays victim? Mr. Brenner, I understand you're upset, but making unfounded accusations against other students is grounds for expulsion. I've reviewed the video you mentioned. It's inconclusive at best. Could be anyone under those masks. The timestamp matches. The location matches. One of them took off her mask. And you see what you want to see because you're a concerned parent. I get it. But Victoria has provided me with her schedule from that day. She was at a study group with 4 other students. I have signed statements. Of course she did. They'd prepared for this. What about the fake IDs? The illegal operation Victoria's running? Victoria looked genuinely hurt. I don't know what he's talking about. This is getting scary, Uncle Raymond. I'm worried about what Ethan might do. He seems unstable. Ethan was staring at his lap, shaking again. They were doing exactly what they'd threatened, discrediting him, making him seem crazy, and it was working. Dr. Ashford pulled out a folder. I have here a confession signed by Ethan last semester. He admits to stealing school property, technology equipment worth approximately $5,000. I was prepared to handle this quietly, but if you persist with these accusations, I'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. That confession is fake. They forced him to sign it 2 days ago. The date says October. Are you suggesting we forged a document? He was daring me to accuse them directly, knowing I couldn't prove it. This is retaliation. You're protecting your niece by threatening my son. Dr. Ashford stood. This meeting is over. Ethan is suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. I recommend you retain legal counsel. We left. In the truck, Ethan was crying again. They're going to get away with it. They're going to ruin me, and no one will stop them. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. Every legal avenue was blocked. The Ashfords controlled too much, but there had to be a way to fight back, to protect my son. That's when I remembered something from the video. Victoria had mentioned her personal safe in her dorm room, the one containing Ethan's forced confession. If I could get that confession, prove it was backdated, we'd have evidence of their coercion. But getting into a dorm room at Riverside Academy meant breaking and entering, meant committing a crime. I thought about Ethan's bruises, thought about Victoria's cold smile, thought about my son's terror and the system that was designed to protect people like the Ashfords while crushing people like us. I made my decision. That night, after Julia and Ethan were asleep, I drove back to Riverside, parked a few blocks from campus, and walked through the shadows to the dormitory building. I'd researched the layout online. Victoria's room was on the 3rd floor. The front door required a keycard, but there was a fire escape on the east side. I climbed it, my heart pounding, trying to ignore the voice in my head screaming that this was insane, that I was throwing away everything, that good parents didn't break the law. Victoria's window was unlocked. I slid it open and climbed inside, using my phone's flashlight to navigate. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a spoiled rich girl. Designer clothes everywhere, expensive electronics, photos of her with various politicians and celebrities at charity galas. The safe was in her closet, behind a row of designer shoes. Small, electronic, the kind that required a code. I'd come prepared. Spent hours watching YouTube videos about picking electronic safes. It took me 20 minutes, my hands shaking, my ears straining for any sound of security guards. When the safe finally clicked open, I almost cried with relief. Inside were stacks of cash, some jewelry, and a folder containing several documents. I photographed everything with my phone, hands shaking. Ethan's confession was there, along with confessions from 4 other students. All signed under duress, I was sure. All backdated. Insurance policies Victoria kept in case any of her victims decided to talk. There were also photos, dozens of them. Other students in compromising positions, passed out at parties, being assaulted, engaging in illegal activities. Victoria's blackmail collection. I photographed everything, then carefully put it all back exactly as I'd found it. Closed the safe, climbed back out the window. I was 2 blocks away when I heard sirens. Security had found something. I ran, heart hammering, diving into bushes as a campus security vehicle passed, made it back to my truck and drove home, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I'd just committed multiple felonies, breaking and entering, theft of documents. If caught, I'd go to prison, but I had evidence now. Proof of Victoria's blackmail operation, proof of the coerced confessions, proof that might actually save my son. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not someone from my firm, but a criminal defense attorney I'd met years ago at a bar association event. David Keller had a reputation for taking on powerful clients and winning. His office was downtown, modest but professional. I showed him everything. The video of Ethan being beaten, the photos from Victoria's safe, explained the whole situation. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. This is bad. These kids have been running a criminal enterprise with their family's protection. But Mr. Brenner, you obtained this evidence illegally. Nothing you photographed in that safe is admissible in court. I know, but it proves what they're doing. It proves other students are being victimized. It also proves you committed breaking and entering. If the Ashfords find out, they'll have you arrested. They'll use your illegal actions to discredit everything else. So what do I do? He leaned back in his chair. Officially, I can't advise you to use illegally obtained evidence, but unofficially, sometimes the court of public opinion is more powerful than any legal court, especially when it comes to rich kids getting away with crimes. I understood what he was saying. You think I should leak this? I think I'm going to step out of my office for 10 minutes, and when I come back, we're going to discuss your legal options for protecting Ethan through legitimate channels. What you do in those 10 minutes is entirely your choice. He left. I sat alone in his office, staring at my phone with all those photos. One click, and I could send them to every news outlet in the state. Expose Victoria's blackmail operation, show the world what these kids were doing, but it would also expose my crime, potentially destroy my career, my freedom, my family's financial security. For 10 minutes, I wrestled with the decision. Then I thought about Ethan's face when he'd begged me not to make him talk. Thought about all those other photos in Victoria's safe, other victims, other families being held hostage by the Ashfords' power. Sometimes being a good parent meant breaking the law. I sent the files to 5 different news organizations, local papers, state newspapers, a national investigative journalism outlet, attached a note explaining the context without revealing how I obtained the photos. Then I deleted my sent folder and cleared my phone's cache. When David returned, I was sitting exactly where he'd left me. Find any legitimate legal strategies? I think we should file a formal complaint with the State Education Board about unsafe conditions at Riverside Academy. Use the video of Ethan's assault as evidence. Push for an independent investigation. That's a good start. It won't accomplish much, but it establishes a paper trail. Shows you're trying to work within the system. He paused. You should probably prepare for things to get worse before they get better. The Ashfords won't take accusations lightly. He had no idea how right he was. The first article hit online at 4 p.m. that afternoon. Local elite academy students accused of blackmail operation. By 6 p.m., every major news outlet in the state had picked up the story. The photos I'd leaked were everywhere. Victoria's face clearly visible in several of them. Carson and Nathan identified by their school uniforms. By 8 p.m., the story had gone national. Wealthy teens run criminal enterprise while attending exclusive boarding school. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded. Parents of other Riverside students started coming forward with stories of their own children being victimized. The state attorney general announced an investigation. The FBI said they were reviewing the evidence for potential federal crimes. I watched it all unfold from my living room, feeling sick and triumphant and terrified all at once. Julia grabbed my arm. Thomas, what did you do? What I had to do. Those photos. How did you get them? I looked at her. I can't tell you. If this goes to trial, you need to be able to honestly say you don't know. She understood. Tears filled her eyes. You could go to prison. I know, but Ethan's safe now. They can't touch him with the whole world watching. My phone rang. Richard Ashford, Victoria's father, my boss. I answered. Mr. Brenner. His voice was ice. We need to talk. My office, now. It's 9 p.m. I said now. The line went dead. Julia grabbed my hand. Don't go. It's a trap. I have to. If I don't, he'll escalate. At least this way I control when and where. I drove to the office building, empty except for cleaning crews and a few workaholics burning the midnight oil. Richard's suite was on the top floor. His assistant, still at her desk despite the hour, gestured me toward his office without speaking. Richard Ashford sat behind his desk, every inch the corporate titan. 60s, silver hair, a suit that cost more than my car. Next to him stood a man I didn't recognize. Tall, professional, with the cold eyes of someone used to making problems disappear. Mr. Brenner, this is Marcus Holt, head of our corporate security. Richard gestured to a chair. Sit. I sat. I assume you know why you're here. I assume you're upset about the media coverage of your daughter's criminal activities. Richard's jaw tightened. Careful. I could have you arrested for defamation, but I'm going to give you one chance to make this right. Tell me how you obtained those photographs. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't play games. Those photos were in Victoria's personal safe. Only 3 people knew that combination. Victoria, me, and my brother, which means someone broke into her dorm room and illegally accessed her private property. I said nothing. Marcus leaned forward. Breaking and entering is a felony. Theft is a felony. If we can prove you committed these crimes, you'll go to prison for years. Your son's college dreams? Gone. Your wife's medical bills? Good luck paying those from a cell. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Richard pulled out a folder. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to recant everything. You're going to admit you fabricated evidence because you were upset about your son's disciplinary issues. You're going to publicly apologize to Victoria, and in exchange, we won't press charges. In exchange, you mean your daughter doesn't go to prison for running a blackmail operation? My daughter is 17 years old. Even if any of these ridiculous accusations were true, which they're not, she'd be tried as a juvenile. She'd get counseling, maybe probation. Her future would remain intact. He leaned back. But your future? That ends tonight unless you do exactly what I say. We own this city. We own the police. We own judges. We own your livelihood. Everything you have, we gave you, and we can take it away. I thought about that video of Ethan begging for mercy. Thought about Victoria's cold smile. Thought about all those other victims in her safe. No. Richard blinked. Excuse me? I said no. Your daughter is a criminal. She tortured my son. She's been blackmailing students for years. I won't recant the truth. Marcus moved toward me. Mr. Brenner, I don't think you understand your situation. I understand perfectly. You're used to bullying people into submission. But I'm not backing down. Not when my son's safety is at stake. Richard's face darkened. You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. And by tomorrow morning, I'll have spoken to every law firm in this state. No one will hire you. You'll be unemployable. Then I'll work somewhere else. But I won't help you cover up what your daughter did. You'll regret this. I already regret not doing it sooner. I stood up and walked out. Marcus followed me to the elevator, a clear threat. When I got home, Julia was waiting with our lawyer. David had come over after I'd called him from the car. They fired you? Julia's voice was hollow. It's fine. We'll figure it out. Thomas, our mortgage is due in 2 weeks. My medication costs $3,000 a month. Ethan's therapy bills. How are we going to pay for any of it without your income? I had no answer. David cleared his throat. I've been looking at the evidence available. With what's already public, the state attorney general has enough to open a criminal investigation, but they're going to want to know how you obtained those photographs. If you admit to breaking and entering, you'll be prosecuted. So I stay silent and hope no one figures it out. The Ashfords will be looking hard for proof. If they find it, you're done. He stood up. I'll do everything I can to protect you, but you should know, this fight is just beginning. He was right. The next morning, police showed up at my door with a warrant for my arrest. Breaking and entering, theft, witness tampering. The Ashfords had moved fast, using their connections to get charges filed before the evidence against Victoria could gain traction. I was handcuffed in front of my family, read my rights, taken to the station in the back of a police car, processed like a common criminal because I'd tried to protect my son. David met me at arraignment. The judge, an older man I later learned was friendly with the Ashford family, set bail at $50,000. I couldn't make it. Spent 3 nights in county jail while David scrambled to get the amount reduced. It was the longest 3 nights of my life. The other inmates ranged from drug dealers to assault suspects. I kept to myself, tried to ignore the violence and desperation around me, thought about Ethan and Julia at home, about how I'd made everything worse by trying to make it better. On the 4th day, David got me released on my own recognizance after arguing that I was no flight risk. I came home to find Ethan withdrawn, not eating, blaming himself for everything. Julia was a wreck, crying whenever she thought I couldn't see her, and our bank account was nearly empty, drained by legal fees and lost income. But the news cycle was still churning. More victims came forward. More evidence emerged. A former Riverside student went on national television describing how Victoria had blackmailed her into sexual activities, then threatened her family when she tried to report it. The FBI raid on Riverside Academy happened on a Monday morning. Agents swarmed the campus, seizing computers, phones, documents. They arrested Victoria, Carson, and Nathan on federal charges: conspiracy, interstate wire fraud, production of child pornography based on some of the photos in Victoria's safe. The charges were serious enough that even their families' lawyers looked worried. The media coverage was relentless. The Ashfords tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, teenagers making mistakes, but the evidence was too damning. More students came forward every day, former victims describing years of systematic abuse. The Legacy Club wasn't just making fake IDs. They'd been running protection rackets, selling drugs, blackmailing students and faculty. Victoria had been the ringleader, but Carson and Nathan were willing participants, and their families had known. That detail came out during the federal investigation. Emails between Richard Ashford and his brother discussing how to handle indiscretions from Victoria. Legal memos about containing exposure if their activities became public. Evidence that the families had been covering for their children for years. Richard Ashford resigned as CEO. Dr. Ashford stepped down as headmaster. Riverside Academy faced potential closure. And through it all, my criminal case proceeded. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious attorney named Leslie Gannon, was determined to make an example of me. I'd broken the law, she argued, and intent didn't matter. Breaking and entering was breaking and entering. David argued necessity defense. I'd acted to prevent greater harm to my son and other victims. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Mr. Brenner, I understand you were trying to protect your son, but we cannot allow citizens to take the law into their own hands. If I dismiss these charges, I'm saying vigilante justice is acceptable. My son was being tortured. The school refused to investigate. The police dismissed us. What was I supposed to do? Go through proper channels. File formal complaints. Hire lawyers. There are legal ways to address grievances. Legal ways that take months or years while my son suffers, while other children remain in danger. I couldn't wait for the system to work when the system was designed to protect the Ashfords. The judge looked at me with something like sympathy. I admire your dedication as a father, but I can't ignore that you committed crimes. I'm going to allow this case to proceed to trial. David filed motion after motion, trying to get the charges reduced or dismissed. Nothing worked. Meanwhile, Victoria's trial was moving forward on a much faster timeline. Federal prosecutors had overwhelming evidence. The photos, testimony from dozens of victims, digital forensics showing years of blackmail messages. She was facing serious prison time. 2 weeks before my trial was set to begin, David called with news. Victoria's taking a plea deal. 20 years, eligible for parole after 12. Carson and Nathan are taking similar deals. What about Richard Ashford? He knew what was happening. They're investigating, but proving he directly participated is harder. He covered for her, but that's not the same as committing the crimes himself. It felt like justice delayed. The parents who'd enabled everything were walking free while I faced prison for trying to protect my son. My trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented evidence of my break-in. Security footage showing someone matching my description near the dorm. Digital forensics suggesting the leaked photos came from my phone. David countered with evidence of Victoria's crimes. Testimony from Ethan about the torture he'd endured. Statements from other victims describing the systematic abuse. He argued I'd acted out of necessity, that any reasonable parent would have done the same. The jury deliberated for 18 hours. When they came back, I was prepared for the worst, ready to go to prison for protecting my son. The forewoman stood. On the charge of breaking and entering, we find the defendant not guilty. I couldn't breathe. Julia grabbed my hand so hard I thought bones might break. On the charge of theft, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel calling for order. Leslie Gannon looked stunned. The jury had engaged in what's called nullification. They'd found that while I technically committed the crimes, I was justified given the circumstances. It was rare, but not unprecedented. David had argued masterfully that I'd acted as any parent would when the system failed to protect their child. The judge addressed the jury. This verdict does not condone breaking the law. It recognizes that extraordinary circumstances sometimes require extraordinary actions. Mr. Brenner, you're free to go. I walked out of that courthouse a free man, but not unchanged. I'd lost my career. Our savings were depleted. Julia's medical bills kept coming. We'd have to sell the house, probably move somewhere cheaper. But Ethan was safe. Victoria and her friends were behind bars. Riverside Academy had announced it was closing permanently, and dozens of victims finally had justice. That night, David came over with a bottle of whiskey. We sat on my back porch while Julia and Ethan watched TV inside. You know you got lucky, David said. That jury could have easily convicted you. I know, but I'd do it again. I know you would. That's what makes you a good father. He poured us each a drink. Richard Ashford is trying to rebuild his reputation. Claims he didn't know the extent of Victoria's activities, but his company's in trouble. Investors are bailing. Board members resigning. Justice has a funny way of working itself out. 6 months later, I found work at a small non-profit that provided legal services to low-income families. The pay was a fraction of what I'd made at the corporate firm, but the work felt meaningful, helping people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers, fighting for those the system was designed to ignore. Ethan transferred to a public school closer to home, struggled at first with the transition, but gradually found his footing, made new friends, joined the debate team, started talking about college again, about his future. He still had nightmares sometimes, still tensed up when he saw black SUVs, but he was healing. Julia's cancer remained in remission. We'd found programs to help with her medication costs, learned to live more frugally. We sold the big house and moved into a smaller place. Life was different now, simpler in some ways, harder in others, but we were together. We'd survived. I never regretted what I'd done in Victoria's dorm room, never regretted breaking the law to protect my son, because sometimes the system fails. Sometimes the powerful are too insulated from consequences. Sometimes being a good parent means crossing lines you never thought you'd cross. Richard Ashford eventually faced federal charges of his own: obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal a felony. He took a plea deal to avoid trial, got 3 years in minimum security prison. His empire crumbled. His brother faced disbarment proceedings. The Ashford family name became synonymous with privilege and corruption. On Ethan's 17th birthday, we took him to dinner at his favorite restaurant. Just the three of us. No fancy celebration, no expensive gifts. He was laughing at something Julia said when he suddenly went quiet. Dad, I never thanked you for believing me, for fighting for me, for risking everything. You never have to thank me. That's what parents do. Not all of them. Some parents would have told me to deal with it, would have worried more about their careers or what people thought. You didn't. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'd do it again in a heartbeat, every single part of it. He smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. I know you would. That's what makes you different. We finished dinner and drove home through streets that felt safer now, cleaner somehow, even though nothing had really changed except our perspective. The law hadn't protected us. The system hadn't worked. But we'd found our own justice, carved our own path through impossible circumstances. A year later, I received a letter from an advocacy group working to change laws around mandatory reporting and institutional accountability. They wanted to use our case as an example in their campaign for reform, wanted Ethan to speak at legislative hearings about what he'd endured and how the system had failed him. He agreed, stood in front of lawmakers, and told his story with a steady voice. Described the torture, the threats, the protection given to his attackers because of their family connections. Described how his father had been prosecuted for trying to help him while his attackers faced only minimal consequences. The laws didn't change overnight. Change never happens that fast. But seeds were planted. Conversations started. Other victims came forward, emboldened by Ethan's courage. The Legacy Club became a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when privilege meets cruelty without accountability. Victoria's parole hearing happened 8 years after her conviction. The prosecutor's office contacted us, asked if we wanted to give victim impact statements. Ethan drafted his carefully, each word chosen with precision. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man, studying law at a state university, planning to become a prosecutor himself. We drove to the prison on a gray November morning. The parole board consisted of 5 people who'd heard thousands of stories like ours, but they listened as Ethan described the lasting impact of Victoria's actions, the nightmares, the trust issues, the years of therapy, how he still flinched when people grabbed his wrists. Victoria sat in her orange jumpsuit looking older than her 26 years. Prison had worn away the arrogant smirk, replaced it with something harder. When given a chance to speak, she apologized. It sounded rehearsed, coached by lawyers, talked about rehabilitation and remorse and how she'd changed. The parole board denied her request. Perhaps in another few years, the chairwoman said, when you've demonstrated genuine understanding of the harm you caused. Outside the prison, Ethan turned to me. Do you think she's actually sorry? I think she's sorry she got caught. Sorry she lost her comfortable life. But sorry for what she did to you? I doubt it. Will you tell me something honestly? Do you regret what you did? Breaking into her room? Risking everything? I thought about it. About the career I'd lost. The financial strain. The 3 nights in jail. About the fear and uncertainty and consequences that had rippled through our lives. Not for a second. 3 months after Victoria's parole hearing, Richard Ashford died of a heart attack in his minimum security facility. The news made minor headlines. Former CEO dies in prison. The comments sections filled with people saying karma had caught up with him. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just tired acceptance that the man who'd tried to destroy my family was gone. The Ashford Industries building downtown was eventually sold and converted into affordable housing units, fitting, in a way, that the monument to their empire became shelter for people they'd have looked down on. Riverside Academy's campus was purchased by the state and turned into a vocational training center, where rich kids had once learned to perpetuate their privilege. Teenagers from working-class families now learned trades that would actually support them. Carson Whitfield was released after serving 6 years, moved across the country, changed his name, tried to disappear into obscurity. Someone outed him on social media within months. He faced protests wherever he went, employers firing him when they learned his history, eternal penance for teenage cruelty. Nathan Lancaster fared slightly better. His family's connections were still strong enough to get him a job at a small firm in another state, but he'd never escape what he'd done, never reclaim the life of ease and privilege he'd been born into. Justice sometimes works in unexpected ways. And me? I kept working at the nonprofit, helping families navigate systems designed to fail them. Built a reputation as someone who'd actually fought back and won, even if the victory was complicated and costly. Parents called me when their kids were in trouble, when they felt powerless against institutional indifference. I couldn't always help. The system was still rigged in favor of the wealthy and connected, but I tried. That was more than I'd done before, when I'd been comfortable in my corporate job, willfully blind to how broken everything was. Ethan graduated law school with honors, got a job at the state attorney general's office in the public integrity unit, investigating government corruption, prosecuting public officials who abused their power. He was good at it, relentless, seeing connections others missed, using his personal experience to understand how systems of power protected the guilty. On his first day of work, I drove him to the office downtown, watched him walk into the building in his new suit, carrying a briefcase, looking every inch the professional I'd once been. Julia squeezed my hand. He turned out okay, despite everything, because of everything. He learned early that justice doesn't happen automatically. You have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to break rules to make things right. Do you think you taught him the right lesson? That breaking the law is acceptable if your reasons are good enough? I'd thought about that question a lot over the years. I taught him that systems fail, that powerful people protect their own, that sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing by rules that were written to keep you down. I hope he uses those lessons for good, but I can't control what he does with them. We drove home through the city I'd nearly lost everything to protect my son from. Past the building where I'd once worked, where Richard Ashford had threatened me. Past the courthouse where I'd been tried. Past the school where Ethan had learned to trust again. Every landmark a reminder of the price we'd paid and the value of what we'd kept. That evening, Ethan called. Dad, there's a case I'm looking at. Boarding school in the northern part of the state. Similar pattern to Riverside. Wealthy kids running a protection racket. Faculty covering it up. One family's filed complaints, but they're being ignored. What are you going to do? Build a case the right way. Warrants, subpoenas, legal tools. But I wanted to ask you something. If the legal way doesn't work, if they block us at every turn like they did with you, what should I do? The question hung in the air between us. The same question I'd faced years ago. The same impossible choice. I can't tell you that, son. Every situation is different. You have to decide what you can live with, what price you're willing to pay, what lines you're willing to cross. But if it was your kid being hurt and the system wasn't protecting them, you'd cross those lines again, without hesitation. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a father who did what he had to do. You have more tools available than I did. Use them first. Only go outside the law if there's literally no other choice. And if there isn't, then you do what's necessary, and you accept the consequences. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you for showing me it was possible. To fight back. To not just accept that the powerful always win. They don't always win. Sometimes they just have more resources to lose. We hung up. Julia had been listening, watching my face. You're worried about him. I'm worried he'll face the same choices I did. That he'll have to decide between his career and doing what's right. That he'll learn the same hard lessons about how broken everything is. Maybe his generation will fix it. Maybe enough people standing up changes things. Maybe. But I didn't quite believe it. The system was too entrenched. Too many people benefited from keeping things broken. Too much power concentrated in too few hands. Real change would require more than individual acts of courage. It would require collective action, sustained pressure, fundamental restructuring. I thought about Victoria in prison, about Richard's death, about Riverside closing, small victories in a larger war that continued regardless, about all the parents who'd face the same choices I had, who'd stand at the same crossroads wondering what being a good parent meant when the law protected monsters instead of children. 2 years passed. Ethan successfully prosecuted the case he'd called me about. Legal warrants, proper procedure, everything by the book. 3 students arrested, school administrators fired, reforms implemented. He'd done it the right way and won. I was proud, but I also knew he'd been lucky. That case had enough evidence easily accessible. That school didn't have families with the Ashfords' connections. Sometimes the legal way worked. Sometimes it didn't. I'd learned to live with that uncertainty, with knowing I'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, with accepting that being a good parent had meant breaking the law, and I'd do it again without hesitation if Ethan ever needed me to. Julia's cancer came back that spring. Different type, more aggressive. The treatments were brutal and expensive. I picked up extra work where I could, represented clients pro bono who taught me skills I traded with others for services we needed. We cobbled together survival from a patchwork of favors and careful budgeting and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Ethan tried to help financially, but he was still paying off law school loans. I wouldn't let him sacrifice his future for our present. On particularly hard days, when Julia was too sick to get out of bed and the bills piled up, and I wondered how much more we could take, I thought about that night in Victoria's dorm room, about the choice I'd made, the laws I'd broken, the consequences I'd accepted. Would I do it differently if I could go back? Would I find some legal path I'd missed? Some way to save Ethan without destroying myself? The answer was always the same. No. Because Ethan was alive and whole and fighting for justice in his own way. Because he'd survived and was building a life of meaning. Because sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become the kind of person you never thought you'd be. Victoria's second parole hearing happened 5 years after the first. This time, Ethan went alone. Told us he needed to face her himself, to see if she'd actually changed or was still performing for the board. He came home that evening looking thoughtful. She admitted it. Actually admitted that she'd been a monster. Talked about the therapy she'd done. The work of understanding why she'd needed that power, that control. Said she'd written letters to all her victims apologizing, not expecting responses, just trying to acknowledge what she'd done. Do you believe her? I asked. I don't know. Maybe. She's had years to sit with her choices. Years to face what she did. Maybe that changes people. Or maybe she's just better at lying now. Did they grant parole? No. Maybe next time. But I told them I wouldn't oppose it if she continued demonstrating genuine remorse. That forgiveness is possible if people actually change. I was proud of him. Proud that he'd found a way to move forward that wasn't consumed by hatred or revenge. That he'd become the kind of man who could consider forgiveness without forgetting justice. That night, Julia's pain was particularly bad. I held her while she cried, administered medication, whispered promises about the future we'd build when she was better. Promises I wasn't sure I could keep, but that we both needed to hear. Thomas, she said during a quiet moment, what you did for Ethan, breaking into that room, risking everything. I never told you, but I was terrified. Terrified you'd go to prison. Terrified we'd lose everything. I know. But I also understood. Because I'd have done the same thing. Any parent would. That's what love is. Protecting your children even when it costs you everything. She fell asleep shortly after. I sat watching her breathe, thinking about the paths we'd walked, the choices we'd made, the prices we'd paid. Thought about Richard Ashford, who died trying to protect his daughter's image instead of actually holding her accountable. About Dr. Ashford, who'd enabled her cruelty. About all the parents who chose their own comfort over their children's well-being. Being a good parent sometimes meant breaking the law, but it always meant putting your child's actual needs above your reputation, your comfort, your career. It meant accepting hard truths about the world and teaching your children to navigate them. It meant fighting when the system failed, even if that fight destroyed you. I'd learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. Had paid for it with my career, my savings, 3 nights in jail, and years of uncertainty. But looking at Julia sleeping, thinking about Ethan prosecuting corruption cases, I knew I'd made the right choice. Not a legal choice, not a safe choice, but the right choice. Morning came too early. Julia needed to get to chemotherapy. Ethan called to tell me about a new case he was investigating. Life continued in its messy, complicated, beautiful way. And I carried with me the knowledge that sometimes being good meant being illegal. That sometimes protecting your family meant becoming a criminal. That sometimes love required you to cross every line you'd ever drawn. I'd crossed those lines. I'd broken the law. I'd become someone I never thought I'd be. And I'd do it all again, without hesitation, without regret, if it meant my son was safe. Because that's what being a good parent meant. Not following rules, not maintaining appearances, but protecting your children against a world designed to break them, even when that protection destroyed you, even when it meant becoming the thing you'd always feared, even when it meant accepting that justice and legality weren't always the same thing. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.